Shoot! Round one.
Get ready. Go!
Fight! Fight! Fight!
Fight!
I want to see some blood out there!
They fed a primal craving.
You could just throw quarters in that machine all night long. It was a really addictive game, and it's like it was pure competition at the arcades.
They brought the arcades back to life.
Street Fighter was the biggest catalyst for arcades, biggest source of rebirth.
And they pushed the gaming envelope.
People always remember the fatalities in Mortal Kombat.
It was a landmark in graphic depth.
This is the history of fighting games.
Flawless victory.
While Galaxian and Space Invaders are kings of the arcade,
It wasn't like a kid phenomenon. It was like really across the board phenomenon in terms of who was playing arcade games.
a game designer named Tim Skelly unknowingly gives birth to the one-on-one fighting game.
My second game, Warrior, was, some people have said it's the precursor to the two-person fighter, but frankly, it's top-down, and the only similarity is your two characters don't shoot the projectiles at each other. They actually make contact with swords. And that really wasn't intentional. I mean, we were trying to do anything special there. We just make a game.
When they're facing each other, you can see they're both holding swords and they're facing right at each other. Very crude game, but it was actually kind of like the first fighting game. That was like 1979.
It was very basic, but people actually had to compete against one another instead of just like going back and forth like on Punk. You're actually inflicting damage on the other opponent. So I think that kind of started it. People were just like, hey, I like beating you up, virtually. And I think that just might have, started the whole, fighting game craze.
But by the time the next notable fighter appears, the arcade market has crashed. And Pac-Man has gone from prince to pauper.
What had happened is we pretty much saturated the market. By the middle of 1982, we were just full.
It was a fad. I think there's no other way to put it. The whole thing just sort of collapsed under its own weight.
But a small handful of survivors continue to make games.
1983, the arcades were kind of going downhill. Data East was ingenious at the time because they had this game where you could have two people play at the same time, and everybody knew, what quarter munchers were at the time, but they came up with this idea in this game that actually would double the earnings because you'd always have two people playing on the game at the same time. Karate Champ, it's an arcade game from 1983 by Data East. It was the first two-player arcade fighting game with dual joysticks on each side. You did special moves in the game and your movement from left to right with the dual joystick.
You basically face off against your opponent. And it was, it was a straightforward karate game, and it was very basic, because, you basically walk up against each other, and you'd start hitting each other. But it was tons of fun, because you were facing off against your friends.
In 1984, Konami introduces countless gamers to carpal tunnel syndrome with ER Kung Fu.
Fighting games sort of created this term button mashing, where you'd see people in arcades just madly tapping the buttons and the joystick. And button mashing really led to some people eventually figuring out, hey, maybe we can sort of add some secret combinations of certain buttons and certain joystick moves to, create amazing new moves and amazing new powers that you'll have in a fighting game.
ER Kung Fu was really kind of the first game where you saw an arena, your environment, place to fight, and it also kind of established the vantage point of fighting games, which is a side view and two guys standing face to face, and you go at it. And the idea of moves and stuff like that was also developed even further with ER Kung Fu.
Like a young Kung Fu student studying the ways of his enemy, Capcom pays close attention to their competitors' success.
Capcom ended up taking a good look at Karate Champ and taking an even better look at ER Kung Fu and decided that they should combine the two.
To beat Data East and Konami at their own game, Capcom jumps into the fray with the release of Street Fighter in 1987.
The biggest fighting game that really started the genre in a big way was Street Fighter.
Well, Street Fighter had these amazing graphics. At the time, this is 1987, mind you, but Street Fighter had a group of characters. You just couldn't use any of them except for Ken and Ryu, and you're on this quest now. I mean, you're trying to fight all these fighters from all over the world. So now, with that embedded in your head for a second, fighting all these players all over the world, you have like a goal in mind.
I was walking around the arcade, and a bunch of people were just hanging out by this one game. I was like, Street Fighter, what's Street Fighter? And then these cool characters, dragon punches. Right when I saw rated Fireball, like, whoa, it's cool.
Street Fighter has gamers virtually pummeling each other in arcades across America. But what Capcom does next will hit the arcade scene with the force of a sonic boom. The first Street Fighter proves to Capcom that gamers will pay good money to lay the smackdown on their friends. And in 1991, they kick it up a notch with Street Fighter II, The World Warrior.
Street Fighter II was the fighting game that really sort of took the world by storm. This was really sort of the peak of arcades, sort of in the early 90s, and everyone was going to arcade basically for two things: racing games and fighting games. And Street Fighter was the ultimate fighting game.
Street Fighter was the biggest catalyst for arcades, the biggest source of rebirth.
Street Fighter 2 really showed who really was a hardcore player, because you could really get your ass handed to you unless you knew what you were doing decisively.
It was so addictive because the moves were so detailed and it was so competitive. You could just throw quarters in that machine all night long and still have fun. Whether it's fighting against a computer or fighting against a friend. It was pure competition at the arcade.
Just earn, tens of millions of dollars or cap them all over the place. It breeds people to come back to the arcade because they want to get better at the game.
Well, there's really no glory in saying that you're awesome at Pac-Man. Yeah, I rule at Pac-Man. Yeah, right, big deal. Who cares? With Street Fighter, it's kind of like a level of respect. You walk in the arcade and see these guys play for hours, and there will be all these court tokens lined up on the machine.
The games that were addictive, that kept you wanting to come back again. And again. And again.
Soon, everyone is kung fu fighting.
After Street Fighter II came out, there were nearly 600 new fighting games.
Street Fighter II came in the early 90s and defined the 2D fighting genre, and you saw a lot of other publishers and developers sort of hopping on board. SNK became, certainly the most successful company to follow in their footsteps.
Fatal Fury was a great game. It was the first kind of one-on-one fighting game that we had for the Neo Geo. The next game after Fatal Fury was World Heroes. Later on, Samurai Showdown came out, and that was really the game that just took over everything. It put SNK on the map.
They kind of gave something different than what Street Fighter was giving. Street Fighter was more like a true 2D fighting game. Samurai Showdown, if I can't find it, that's 2D as well. But Samurai Showdown was cool because you had weapons. It had special moves. Instead of like a regular fireball or Guile's, somersault kick, they had like really cool special moves, like a real special attack that did massive amounts of damage. They made an impact on the whole Street Fighter crowd.
And as the competition grows increasingly fierce, designers begin coming up with more wild twists on the fighting genre. Games like Primal Rage pit dinosaurs against one another, while Capcom's Darkstalkers features classic horror movie monsters. But the one game that gains more attention than any other is...
The game that really changed it and kind of took away from Street Fighter was Mortal Kombat. Because in Mortal Kombat it's not cartoon characters, you have a person digitized on the screen, and there was blood and gore. You never forget the first time. It says, finish him, finish him. You never forget that, and it stuck with people.
Ed Boon and John Tobias came up with this Mortal Kombat franchise, which I think they would admit is basically, a rip-off of the Street Fighter phenomenon. But what they did was they really took things to the next level, and they, added blood and gore.
But it had that, holy crap factor, pulling the guy's head out and the spine is hanging, or kicking off someone's head. Yes, it's over the top. Yes, it's totally exaggerated. I think part of it caused a lot of stir in the news and stuff. Mortal Kombat game showing people taking out hearts and stuff. It was just great. It's just fun. It's entertainment. Fighting fans, really wanted something different, and Mortal Kombat, gave players that.
Nobody realized that somebody was going to make that big a step forward in terms of just, shocking violence in an arcade game. But it was a landmark in graphic death.
But the violence that makes Mortal Kombat so popular also makes it one of the most controversial games of the 90s.
The fact that there was blood in the game was sort of this big controversy.
There was concern about these games and members of Congress talking about video games being the sort of decline and fall of Western civilization and destroying our youth and leading them down the path of no good.
I hope you walk away with one thought today, that if you don't do something about it, we will.
And the industry felt that we needed to respond in some way, in a proactive way.
They wanted to get some sort of a rating system, but that was like kind of the cause of that whole